Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and I'm a Forbes contributor covering social entrepreneurship and impact investing. Our guest today is Dr. Alan Ver Beek, who is the co-founder of the Association for a More Just Society, doing remarkable work in Honduras to restore peace and order to what is arguably the most violent culture or country on the planet today. So, Kurt, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Devin. Thanks for having me.
We're excited to learn more about the work you're doing in Honduras, just because of the tremendous risk that you and your people are taking. I understand that one of your organization was killed a few years ago, in fact, doing the work that you do down there.
Yeah, that was a very hard year and hard few years afterwards. In 2006, one of our lawyers who was working for labor rights for security guards and cleaning women, we were working with a company. We thought we were trying to negotiate that they at least would pay minimum wage and overtime. And after several months, we started getting threats. And actually within a few days after our first threat, they killed Dionisio Diaz Garcia on his way to court and shot him in traffic. And we've had several other of our staff got death threats since, but thankfully no one else has been hurt.
Oh, that's remarkable. It's tragic, but it frames the discussion we're having, I think. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in Honduras. Help us understand first the problem. There must be a reason you're devoting time and attention to solving these problems in Honduras, but tell us what the problem is to start.
So my wife Joanne and I came to Honduras in 1996, and the idea was we wanted to help poor people. And we started out with programs working with an NGOs and program microfinance, agriculture, health, literacy stuff. And in 96, after I got my PhD from Cornell, or Devin and I are Cornell alums, ended up coming back here and deciding that a lot of the work that we were doing was severely limited by two big issues here in Honduras. One was corruption and the other was violence. And I think that's not true just in Honduras, it's true all over the third world. So people get a small loan and start a small business, but then the gangs, organized crime would start extorting them, business officials asking for bribes to do what they were supposed to do. And so we started an NGO called the Association for a More Just Society. And our goal was still to help poor people, but the goal was to do that by addressing those two issues of corruption and violence, and focusing on how to make the government systems work instead of, go ahead.
How is life in Honduras altered from the familiar life most of us share in the United States because of the violence? What are the differences you see?
Well, I think a couple of things. People are very afraid. So the fear is, the little store on the corner selling groceries. The gang members will show up and say, you have to start paying us $20 a week or something could happen to you or your kids. And they're afraid to go to the police because they don't know if the police will actually arrest them or not, or if they'll tell the bad guys that they're the ones who told on them. And what's interesting through our work, we've ended up finding out the police are also afraid, because if the police end up doing what they're supposed to do, oftentimes the bad guys get loose because people aren't willing to go to trial and witness against them. And then the bad guys go and look for the cops who arrested them. So there's a whole lot of distrust, especially poor people feel very unprotected, that they can't trust their neighbors, some of whom are involved with bad stuff, and also government officials who either out of fear or out of corruption are also not doing what they're supposed to do. So yeah, yes. Lots of fear and mistrust.
Some 95, 96, was it 97% of murder cases go unsolved in Honduras?
Yeah, so I think the data in the U.S. is it's not all homicides are solved anywhere. I think in the U.S. it's somewhere around 40 or 50% of homicides are solved, and here in Honduras it's only 4%. So again, that level of impunity allows bad people to do more bad things, and without fear of getting caught. It makes good people afraid to press charges, to be witnesses, because they're afraid the bad guys will get loose. And it also makes the authorities afraid, because in the end they're not sure that the system will work either.
It really is a scary situation. So tell us about some of the activities you're undertaking and the progress you're making.
Well, probably one of our, at least right now, most famous projects, we call it the Peace and Justice Project. And in 2005, I came home from work one day and my kids were crying and my wife Joanne was upset, and it ended up that a father of two of their classmates had been killed. He sold fruits and vegetables out of the back of a pickup truck, and he was leaving to go buy vegetables that morning, about 4:30 in the morning, and three guys showed up with ski masks, robbed his money. He gave it to them, and even after he gave it to them, they shot him in the head. And my friend Carlos, who is a co-founder of AGS, lives right next door, and I ended up talking to him because at that time he was my kid's principal, and he said, you know, did you hear about this? And he said, yeah, you know, do we know who did it? No, nobody knows. But 2 days later, the widow of the man came and said that she had two witnesses and that they were willing to testify, and could Carlos and I help? So in the US, if you got witnesses to a homicide and the widow is willing to testify, you go to the police. But we were, like I mentioned earlier, afraid to go, wondering, you know, like, could we trust the police? Would they end up telling that the widow had got these witnesses, and maybe the widow, the witnesses, or us would be in danger? So we started making phone calls, like, who can we trust? How can we tell somebody? And almost 3 months went by before we got things arranged for these guys to witness to someone. And before the whole thing came down, the three guys ended up killing an off-duty cop. And the cops chased them down, shot one of them and killed them, and arrested the other two. And Carlos and I, after that, were sitting in his living room one afternoon, and we started to count up how many people had been killed by these same three guys after we knew who they were. And we ended up coming up, in those 3 months, we knew that they had killed 13 people.
Oh my gosh.
And so we knew who they were. The widow knew who they were, because we didn't know who we could trust. We didn't know what to do, and we ended up not doing anything. And so we decided that AGS needed to do something about that. And the problem we had is we didn't know who we could trust. So we ended up hiring an ex-cop who we heard from lots of people was very honest, and an ex-prosecutor, a lawyer who worked. And an ex-cop knows what we don't know. The ex-cop knew who were the good cops and who were the bad cops. The ex-prosecutor knew who the good prosecutors and the bad prosecutors were. And we started about 6 months later working with every homicide in our neighborhood. We didn't even know it. Our neighborhood had the highest homicide rate in Honduras at that time. It's 30,000 people. We had 52 homicides in 2005. So a homicide rate of 130. We ended up contacting witnesses and family members of victims, and slowly but surely they would trust us because we were an NGO, and we knew the cops that we could connect these people with, and we started helping them witness and help the police find the people who were responsible. So we worked very closely with the police and with the prosecutor's office. And our homicide rate in our neighborhood went down from 52. Our best year so far has been 5. This year we've had 6 homicides so far, which is still way too many, but 6 is way better than 52.
Yeah.
With just 3 staff people working alongside of family members and witnesses. making sure they stay safe. About 120 cases have gone to trial. We have around a 50 to 60% conviction rate for homicides in our neighborhood. So pretty cool stuff. The Honduran government is now going to implement this same strategy in Tegucigalpa and San Pedro Sula. We were written up in New York Times about a year ago for something similar to this, about this project. And the State Department is also talking about trying to use this model in other neighboring countries.
Well, it sounds like you're really making a difference. Give us a sense of how this is impacting Honduras overall. How big a piece of the Honduran problem is 52 murders?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So basically, because of our experience in this, we're now working in 6 neighborhoods, maybe covers 200,000 people out of a population of 8 million. So not a small number, but not huge either. The Honduran government, if it implements this, will become much, much bigger. But because of our work in here, in these neighborhoods, we gained a reputation for being an organization that knew what was going on with the police and the prosecutor's office with violence and homicides. And we ended up forming an alliance, which includes the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, World Vision, a bunch of Honduran NGOs. And we've been working for the last 3 years on trying to get the police force cleaned up, the prosecutors, the courts, and implementing a bunch of changes. So as you mentioned sort of in the beginning, Honduras for the last 2.5 years or so has had the highest homicide rate in the world, 86 per 100,000. The US is about 10, so 8 times the homicide rate of the US. But last year it was 66. This year it should be in the high 50s. So the homicide rate has dropped about 30 points in the last 3 years. And we can't take all of the credit for that work, but I think our work alongside of the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church and a group of whole NGOs has made a difference in pressuring the government to address serious issues of corruption and just bad work culture within the police and within the prosecutor's office. So I think while our specific project of peace and justice is going to be copied around the country, at the same time we've been working on a national level addressing the issues of violence and corruption within the justice system.
And how is the corruption problem progressing? How are you making progress there?
So as you can guess, this is always slow. Most of the violence, well, there's probably a base level of violence here in Honduras, and then above that base level, let's say if it was 30 to 40 homicides per 100,000, the other 50 was due to drug trafficking. So much of the violence, the majority of the violence in Honduras for the last 10 years has been drug related. And that's where the US plays an important role in feeding this violence by our demand for drugs. So as long as there's drug traffickers, there's lots of money. As long as there's lots of money, there's lots of corruption. So I think in part because of AJS's work, but also this coalition, the new Honduran government that's been in for about 18 months has been taking very aggressive action in fighting drug traffickers. So about 10 of the largest Honduran drug traffickers have been extradited to the United States. They're awaiting trial. They're also clearly telling on all of their fellow drug traffickers. And the homicide rate is dropping. They have gotten rid of some of the worst police officers. We'd like to see more on that. The international donors have been giving a lot of money. The US State Department, the IDB, the World Bank have been helping out. So I think this is a problem that didn't happen overnight. It won't be fixed overnight, but I think we are seeing the homicide rate dropping, drug traffickers extradited. There's 3 of the largest families I mentioned to you before we got started, that yesterday the U.S. Treasury Department indicted one of the most wealthy families and most powerful families in Honduras, the Rosenthal family. It's being indicted for money laundering and drug trafficking. One of the 5 wealthiest families, probably the 5th largest bank in Honduras that they own. So I think both the U.S. government and Honduran government are taking steps that are starting to see results, and that's exciting.
Oh, it is exciting. Well, you're doing just amazing work down there. I want to just talk to you about a couple of personal items to get your insights as an entrepreneur, as a leader. You're making such a difference. You've become a real role model and an inspiration to a lot of people. Who do you look up to?
Yeah, nice question. So I have 3 Honduran heroes. I'll talk about my Honduran heroes. One of my heroes is Carlos Hernandez, who is my co-founder of AGS. He's passionate about justice, but he's also keeps a sense of humor about it, which is not very typical. Julieta Castellanos is the National University president here, 80,000 students. She's done an amazing job, but her son, the 8 police officers tried to carjack her son, and they killed him. And since then, she has become probably the most outspoken person in Honduras for reforming the police force and for cleaning up violence and corruption. And someone I admire very much. And the 3rd person is the Honduran Minister of Education. Haven't talked much about our education work, but he has transformed the Honduran education system with some help from AJS. I can tell you more about that, but those are 3 people that I admire very much.
No, that's great. Inspiring examples. Now, you know, Kurt, you're a bright guy. Why have you tackled this? Of all the things you could be doing in the world, why Fix Honduras?
Well, I talked a little bit about it a minute ago. When we came to Honduras, we had no specific interest in staying in Honduras the rest of our lives. We got an internship here right out of college, and it sounded like a fun thing to do for a couple of years. And very quickly, though, we fell in love with Honduras, and we fell in love with the people. We wanted to help the poor, and we thought, you know, microenterprise and agriculture and health work was the way to go. And especially after I finished my PhD, I became more and more convinced that we were not addressing the systemic issues, the justice issues. And that's when we started looking at these topics of violence and corruption. And as we've gone forward, I'm just more and more convinced that lots of times we are wasting our energy. We're creating parallel systems, is the way I usually describe it. So if the public schools aren't working, we'll build a couple little private schools. If the public health clinics or the hospitals aren't working, we'll build a couple of private clinics. And I think that's important. It's what I spent a bunch of years doing. It is changing lives. But in the end, I'm more and more convinced that if we can't get the public system to work, the public schools, the public healthcare system, the justice and police system, that we're going to have very minor effects. And that if we really want to help the poor, we have to make those public systems work for them.
Yeah, well, that's certainly a big challenge, and I'm sure glad you're tackling it. One of the things that, Kurt, I keep thinking about, and I think all of our listeners who want to do more good, want to have more impact, we're always looking for an impact hack, some tip, some trick, some practice that we can implement that would help us do more good in the world. What's a secret that you're using to do more good?
Well, I think maybe I'd mention 2. First, I think that all of our work, or almost all of what we do, starts with really, at least I would like to think it's always really good, hard-hitting research. And I think lots of times NGOs or people like me who work for poor people and stuff, we both think that we already know what the problem is and we know what the solution is, and we just try and get started right with doing it without first asking the hard questions for collecting the data. Sometimes I think it's a little bit of laziness too, because lots of times doing the research takes time and it's not so much fun and it's not what we got into this for. So, you know, we have worked very hard on, for example, that impunity data you mentioned, the 96%. I mean, we went and looked in the court system and we tracked cases and we figured out how many of these homicides have not been fixed. We went around and went to 600 schools and we found out how many teachers were on the payroll but not in the classroom. We found out that 26% of the teachers in Honduras were on the payroll but not in the classroom. And those sorts of numbers are powerful, and they sway public opinion, and they put pressure on government officials to make things different. So I think the first thing I would say is that we in NGOs need to do the hard work, create the hard research, and we got to get that out in the press. We hold press conferences several times a month on once we have this research done. But the second piece is, I think we are always willing to work together with the government to fix things. And so there's also a group of NGOs around the world that just criticize the government, and everything the government does is bad, everything is wrong, and they can never do anything right. And we have shown that we are more than willing to criticize and to say what's broken, but we're also willing to come along and help fix it. And I think the government, that was unusual, at least here in Honduras, and they've come to see that is true. And so they're willing to take it on the chin when we say something bad about them, because they know that we'll come alongside and help them fix them. And if they fix it, we will give them the credit that they did fix it, and we'll say it publicly. And I think both of those things are not so common among nonprofits.
Sure. Well, I appreciate you sharing those. One of our Twitter followers, a fellow by the name of Jack Dykstra, is a law enforcement officer, and he asked how you're partnering with law enforcement, and I think he's thinking about U.S. law enforcement to help you with your problems in Honduras.
So we do partner a lot with the Honduran law enforcement, police, prosecutors, and we have a good relationship here. As you might guess, the ability of U.S. law enforcement to get involved actively in Honduran investigations is somewhat limited. But if he was willing to try and help us out, he should contact us at our website or on Facebook, and we can see how we can get involved. I think one of the things I should say too, maybe goes along with what I was just mentioning. What oftentimes Americans, even Hondurans here, think everybody in the government's bad. The Honduran cops are all corrupt, the prosecutors are corrupt, the teachers are all bad. And through our work, we've found that the vast majority of Honduran authorities are good, and they want to do the right thing. Sometimes they don't know how. Sometimes they have limited resources. Sometimes they're afraid. They've been intimidated. They've been threatened. They'll show up and say, "We know where your kids live if you try and do something." So they have very difficult situations. So we've worked very closely and had very positive results overall. I mean, there's clearly some not good apples, but the majority of the apples in the bushel are quite good.
Oh, that's great. Well, Kurt, one last question. Before you go, tell us how people can learn more about your organization, how they can connect with you personally and help out. Yep.
So as you guess, we have a website, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff. Probably the easiest way to find it is Association for More Just Society Honduras. But the website is www.ajs.us.org. But if you look for Association for More Just Society Honduras on Facebook or on Twitter, you'll find us very easily, and we will get right back to you.
Fantastic. Well, Kurt, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. We really want to see you succeed in all the great work that you're doing.
And thank you, Devin, for this, but also for all you're doing to promote this sort of work around the world.
Well, thank you. And let's do some good.